Welcome to Think Aside. Today I'm outside. It's super sunny, like super duper sunny. I'm in northern Maine, as I've said before, and so as a result, a lot of uh, a lot of our days are not sunny. We get a lot of winter, and we get a lot of cold. It's actually this week just started to warm up. We have 60-degree weather, and that's like fantastic here. So. Um, Today I wanted to talk about a few things that I started researching and then it kind of developed into something else, as it often does, and that is private prisons and, criminals and the idea or the stigma behind hardened criminals and convicts and all that stuff. And I started to look into how private prisons exist and the how prisoners become kind of like the commodity, and how people end up looking for the cheapest amount. So, like, I say that as in the federal government, they actually contract private prisons, and they say, okay, so we need someone to do this for $100 versus what it's going to cost us at 150, and so on. So people put in contracts, and then as a result, they end up getting the cheaper cost. But you know, as we've learned with anything else, money and how cheap it is isn't always the best, and how the world kind of revolves around money, and so as a result it ends up causing some problems. And so what happens in this case is, of course, the prisons end up trying to cut costs where they can to make their money or their profit as maxed out as possible, which in most cases like that can be fine, when done correctly, when there's proper stipulations put into place and all that stuff. But what happens with prisons is, of course, that doesn't happen. Prisoners are taken advantage of. I say prisoners, people, like, right? They're people. They're not inhuman just because they've done something wrong. Especially in like victimless crimes and stuff like that, you could argue that they're not even criminals to begin with. So there's a few different factors, but the things I wanted to talk about is more of like the ones where criminals have done something wrong, where they have in fact done uh, done wrong, and they're put into prison and kind of thrown away the key, more or less. And you know, from what I could tell, about 95% of the people who go to prison do end up back into society. The problem with that is, out of those 95% of people, about 86% of the people who get out of prison, they end up going back, which is called recidivism. And so that, of course, causes problems in itself. And it shows that, when they come back too, another thing you got to keep in mind is that when they come back from prison, they come back from effectively criminal school. And so they learn everything they need to survive there. They learn about the criminal world in general because that's what it houses. And then they come back and they're a different person, and they're potentially more dangerous and more hardened, you could say, and have more of a negative life set. And so what happens from there is, of course, you have kind of like the cycle that repeats itself of people that are just doing what they're not supposed to, and going back to prison and all that. So knowing that this is the case, I started to look into, what if there were alternatives? What could we do instead of just putting people in prison, knowing that it's clearly not working? And there's a few different things that I learned. One of them being, there's what's called restorative justice. What that means, instead of these criminals going to the typical prison, they end up going, from what I understand, to these places where they are given an opportunity to understand what they've done wrong. They're able to learn and grow. They're given the chance to learn and to educate, to learn trades and things like that. But they also are able to make recompense to the people that they've done wrong to, and victim crimes. Instead of our current system, which is a justice system that the defendant or the guilty owe to the state or to the government, the society as a whole. Instead, they owe to the victim. Their whole point, or one of their points, is to pay their dues to the victim and make it right with the victim. And so the victim ends up walking away from what they've seen anyway. The victim ends up walking away feeling a lot better. They have more closure. They have less impact from the trauma and such. And the convict, or the person that did the crime, ends up actually feeling better as well. They end up understanding what they've done in a lot of cases, and as a result, because they feel that pain and they understand it, they don't want to cause that problem again. They've seen great rates in other countries. There's a country, I believe it's Norway, that actually their main way of handling issues is through the restorative justice instead of doing the typical prison system. And they've actually, from what I understand, have one of the lowest recidivism rates that there is, which is, really interesting. Excuse me. So I guess the biggest thing that I wanted to bring up was that the difference, I think, between the normal prison system and recidivism, and then I guess one of the biggest points I wanted to bring up between the normal prison system and a restorative justice type of system is that restorative justice, a lot of that, I wouldn't say hinges on, but kind of encourages the possibility of it, is compassion and forgiveness. And in some cases people forgive the criminals. I say criminals as kind of like a target, but as the people who cause these issues, the offender, I guess you could say. So the offenders, people forgive them oftentimes not for the offender, but for themselves, because of the weight that holding on to that sort of thing causes. Just like anything else, right? Like when someone calls you a bad name or a mean name or whatever, and you let it get to you, and then you hold it as a grudge against them, that's weight on your shoulders. That's not weight on their shoulders. They might have weight on their shoulders regarding it, but it's not the same thing. You're not putting that weight on them. They are, right? Just as they're not putting that weight on you, you are. And so when you choose to forgive, you choose to take that weight, you choose to take that thing that's in you and get rid of it, that chip on your shoulder, that grudge. So that way you can just live a lighter, happier, healthier life. And so I think that's an important factor that comes in with the restorative justice when we focus on empathizing, and when we focus on helping people return back to the world when they pay their sentence or whatever, but they end up returning back a healthier, better person. They return trying to give something to society instead of destroy it, which they may have originally intended to do. And you could argue a lot of different factors that go into that. A lot of the time it's the environment, right? And again, like, if you put them in that environment that's around a bunch of people that are exactly that, the negativity and everything, then they're not going to be better for society. They're going to be worse. It's a breeding ground for negativity, for evil, you could argue. So I guess that's something I wanted us to think aside. But also on top of that, the idea of, can we individually forgive someone if someone does something like, say, committing a murder, someone that we love? Like, can we truly forgive them? And if we can, what kind of sentence do we think they deserve? Do we think that they do need some sort of punishment? If they do deserve a punishment, who gets to decide? Is it the individual, the person that's either the victim or the family member, or close one of the victim? Is it the society as a whole, as it is now? Is it like what is it that we do for the rules, for the laws? Is it, does the person, if they do serve a sentence, where do they serve that sentence? Do they go with other people serving sentences? Should they be with other people serving sentences? What kind of human rights should they keep? Should they still have the right to eat a decent meal? Should they have a proper bed to sleep in? Should they be able to communicate with their family members? Should they be able to visit with their family members? Should they give their life to it? Should they be able to have their life taken? Should they? Should they? There's so many aspects that go into going into punishing another individual. And a lot of that comes down to, I guess, us deciding as a whole, but who are we to decide that sort of thing, right? So like say someone infringes upon the rights of another person. So they've taken their rights, right? By say they hurt them. Now they've violated their human rights as a person to enjoy their life and to not be infringed upon, to not be hurt, to not be, you know. And so when they do that, now we take it upon ourselves to effectively do just that to the person who did that to another person. So if that's the case, are we really any better, and should not anyone do that to us as a result? Right? And so you could argue, well, they lost their rights when they did it to another person. Okay, so if that's the case, are we treating them like a non-human now? Are criminals not a human? What about the people who, in a system that isn't perfect, in a system that's how it works, what about those who are wrongly convicted? What happens to them? They end up, is that just an unfortunate side effect? That these people might end up losing their lives to a death penalty, which has happened, or going to prison for years until they have been able to finally prove that they're innocent? What happens to these people that we set up a system of that ruins their lives, right? What happens when a car manufacturer ends up doing their best, trying to make it super safe? There's a flaw in the system in their vehicle. The vehicle crashes, goes off the road, and someone dies because of it. What happens to that system? What happens to that car company? Doesn't just continue to be made. Company doesn't just, oh, that's just an unfortunate side effect of our design. That's not what happens. And it's the same type of scenario with anything. We should constantly be trying to improve it and to make it better for everyone, and not ignore the side effects of it because, well, it's in our best interest currently, or it's what we think is best. What about the forgiveness? What about not the immediate justice? What about not being so selfish, seeing how it can benefit just us, but also benefit the victims? How can it benefit society in a long term? Because if we're just going to imprison everyone for everything, or, continuously more things, then does that not just create a more damned society? It's all things to think aside, right? But that's just my my thought process for this week is, should the prison system exist the way that it does? Should prisons exist? Think aside. Thank you.